Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Regeneration Podcast. Michael Martin, I know you are dying to talk about this thing with Tay-Tay Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. I haven't read the stories, but it colored me interested. The idea, Gary, have you heard of it? Like, we never talk about this stuff.
I'm not sure, so keep going.
I'd say I haven't had a chance to read beyond the headlines, but the notion is that somebody leaked documents from maybe a PR company they had retained, but it's alleged that in the documents they were going to set up a fake breakup, as a good PR thing. And I wanted to contrast that with the actual stuff we're talking about today. But no.
I know. Talk about living in a simulation, man.
That just feels like it ought to be a setup for what might or might not be a bad movie.
Yeah. And I hope our listeners hear me to say I haven't read, and I apologize to everybody if I'm wrong. It's funny that my wife is a piano teacher, and once in a while, I think it was with the OJ thing, the OJ thing many years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Where the same coverage you could find on Entertainment Tonight that you also saw in the evening news, and other people have commented on that. But my wife is usually teaching piano kind of after the dinner hour to students. And I don't watch much TV at all, but she's as likely or not, if I was turning on the TV, for me to watch like 10 minutes of what's happening with like Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
It's like be taking a crap. What are you looking at when you're, yeah.
Well, I did run that Taylor Swift thing by my daughter who.
Oh yeah, what'd she say?
She didn't know about it, and I think she knows all the trivia there is to know about Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
She said her eyes kind of bugged out.
Yeah.
It seems legit, right?
I don't know. And does it dent an image? I don't know enough about what she stands for. I think I like some of it. I'd like a lot of people who aren't dumb, who really, really like this whole thing. And it is a cultural phenomenon that the amount of money she'd be bringing to a city, the fact that people haven't done this since the Beatles, color me interested in all that too. I just don't know much about it.
But, and I think with a lot of people who've been famous since they were teenagers, they don't have real lives. And I've always, even back when she first started out, my musician friends and I always felt protective of her because we didn't want, like dad. I mean, she's the same age as my oldest son.
Oh, wow.
So
I like her.
Yeah, I like her too. I mean, she's super talented, but
and I think in her corpus, she does a lot of stuff like reflecting on being a product of that. And people really eat that up, the whole idea of something being super meta.
Yeah. And it's nice to see a person who's been famous for that long who isn't screwed up with, drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. And I've one more Taylor Swift story, and then we will get onto it. And I'll have Michael, who will introduce our guest by telling a story of how you two met each other. But at my oldest daughter's wedding, my oldest daughter, Mary, she did a Rotary year over in Belgium, and then she taught English over in Vietnam, and that's where she met her husband, Doug, great guy. Edwin's, again, he'll be on the show. He's a big listener. But at their wedding, a lot of the families from Belgium came over. They spoke French. But the highlight of the wedding for everybody there was they were playing Taylor Swift "Shake It Up," and like the French people we were all one. It was like Pentecost. We were all singing and dancing. And it's because she's universally recognized, and it was the coolest moment. Yeah,
she's not gross, but so Mike,
tell me.
I think I've been pissing a lot of people off lately.
Online or what? I've had such a busy week. Yeah.
When I talk to friends about our current political shift, which we're going to talk to our guest Gary Chartier about today, which you and I have talked about in the last couple of podcasts, right, Mike?
Yeah. And just kind of fell into it.
Well, we fell into it, but it kind of blew up, or at least for us. I mean, for our little podcast, it blew up. And it was interesting to see all the interest in what we were talking about. And we were just kind of riffing, especially in that first one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which we did a week ago Saturday. And then actually from that, our guest today, Gary Chartier, who I'm going to let him explain all of his different gigs because he's got a whole thing.
And Gary, I'd like to know how you discovered the
Professor,
podcast too.
lawyers, all this stuff. So I want to make sure I get the story straight. So we're gonna get it straight from Gary. But Gary reached out to me via email and sent me a copy of his book, which is fantastic. I mean, it's a long book, so I'm not done with it yet. But it's let me show you.
I want to see it.
There we go. And it is entitled it doesn't have the title, or does it? What's the title of the book? Christianity and the Nation State, right? Christianity and the Nation State.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is gonna be a wild conversation.
I've only gotten through the introduction, but it's fantastic. And
I think about that stuff a lot.
We do, and we talk about this. I mean, one of our favorite topics is anarchism, right? Christian anarchy.
Wow.
And one of the things Gary
But we've never done a show on the nation state. I think we could do like 20.
Well, it's actually, believe it or not,
nation state. It's a thing.
Oh, it is. But
so it's a funny way of doing politics.
It is.
Yeah.
But here's the thing though, Mike.
The thing that has the monopoly on killing somebody in a certain geographical area. Yeah.
Right. But so, you're aware I've been teaching this course online on Christian romanticism.
Yeah.
And it's about to wrap up Saturday. And the last book we're going to cover is Novalis' Christendom or Europe, which is not really a book, it's more of a pamphlet.
And you wrote a fabulous introduction to a new issue of that. I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah. Didn't I? Yeah. And it's kind of it's synergistic that we're going to talk about this today and about Gary and his book and our current situation, because as we both know, these are things that we think about all the time. That's how we met. That's how we met, Mike.
Yeah.
Not just on sociology, but on
rethinking currency, rethinking everything.
The whole damn thing. Yeah. That's I mean, we had at my farm in 2016, 8 years ago, the
Radical Catholic Reimagination of Everything.
The Radical Catholic Reimagination of Everything conference. And
so, what a timeless title. Yeah, that's all we've ever tried to do.
It was a rather ambitious project. But here's what I found what I wanted to read.
Now, you'll get a kick out of the fact that we got kicked out of hosting it at your college because if us talking about education wasn't going to feed the religious orthodoxy of like state certified,
tell me about it, man.
This and that, then they weren't going to host.
So here, let me read this little bit from the introduction to Gary's book.
Okay.
He says, in this book, I join Christian pacifists in challenging the state, even as, while arguing for strict limits on the use of force, I don't join with them in embracing unqualified nonviolence. Focusing on creationally rooted flourishing, I note reasons to look skeptically at the modern nation state, including the democratic nation state, and to welcome new institutional forms, even as I explain why it might make sense in some cases to participate in the activities of existing political institutions.
It's a great conversation.
And I also explain why I believe that Christians should embrace the liberal tradition in politics, and not only in virtue of human sinfulness. And I could go on, but that I read that and I said, "Whoa,
that's
we got to talk to this guy.
Yeah,
we have got to talk to this guy, Mike." So, welcome to the show, Gary Chartier.
Great to be here.
So, Gary, before we proceed, tell us about your background and about what you do.
So, I'm the associate dean of the business school at La Sierra University, which is a small liberal arts institution in Southern California, about an hour outside of LA. It's a little odd that I ended up as the associate dean of a business school because I never actually had a business class, but that was a product of my developing a great relationship with the dean, with whom I've been working fruitfully and enjoyably for the last 25 years. My background, I guess, looks something like this. I did an undergrad degree in history and political science with bits and pieces of religion and philosophy, and initially went to graduate school at Claremont in philosophy of religion and theology, and then pulled up stakes and went to Cambridge.
Cool.
And I did a PhD in theology at Cambridge. I wrote a dissertation about friendship,
Really?
which kind of sat around in
Holy
limbo for a
shit.
very long time, didn't get published until actually 2 years ago.
Can you send me a copy of that book? I'd
Of
like to
course.
review
Yeah,
it for Front
absolutely.
Porch or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, and so then I spent 7 years post PhD not finding the kind of employment situation that I wanted. And so kind of I guess I'd been interested in law for a while. So I went to law school at UCLA, a place that was worth going because it's got a lot of people who are very kind of philosophically interested. So really the experience there fit pretty nicely with what I had already been doing. While I was in law school, I started working part-time at the business school where I am now, and that turned into a full-time position once I had finished law school. Since then, I guess I have been a bit of a dilettante. I end up publishing in things ranging from, I mean, it's kind of all broadly philosophical, but legal and political philosophy and ethics and philosophical theology, a lot of theology recently in particular. And I guess one book of sermons and one book of sonnets. So I'm a
Wow.
dilettante.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
All right. You're in the right place.
I'm sure I've
You came to the right place.
read you, but didn't remember your name. Like all of a sudden, I think in this talk, I'm gonna say, wow, you're that guy or something. But we'll let that naturally evolve.
If
Because
it
we
if
have
it
so many
happens, great, but
overlapping
if
interests.
not, I'll be sending you some stuff.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I wonder if you could, Gary, explain why you reached out to us.
Yeah. So I first, I think, discovered regeneration when you guys interviewed John Milbank
Oh
a
yeah.
week ago.
I was going
And
to ask you about him and theology with you over at Cambridge in England.
yeah,
in
so
England.
John came to Cambridge a year and a half after I left. So I never overlapped with him. I finished in 91 and I think he started in 93. And so he and I have never been at the same physical location. But I remember discovering theology and social theory when I was a grad student and just thinking, if I simply knew everything that was in this book, I would feel like a tremendously educated person.
Yeah.
Our conversation with him was great. I mean, he's got no defenses up. He is open to talk about anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. John is an intellectual hero of mine. That doesn't mean, in his case, as in the case of anybody else, that I can't find things to disagree with him about. But I'm really impressed by him as a just immensely broad and learned and thoroughly interesting person. And I've actually got him doing, sadly online, a named lectureship at my institution later this year.
Wow. Wow.
So
you see on Twitter that all of a sudden, like, he's just reading everything ever written by Schelling, right? And he's just like, who does this, like, late in their career? And he knows Schelling now better than anybody, any other Schelling scholar, probably.
Yeah, he really is intellectually voracious.
Yeah,
and it's so impressive. So anyway, that's how I discovered regeneration, discovered you guys, subscribed, and so then reached out, as Michael mentioned, because I was so pleased with the back and forth that you had about political realignment, which to me just seems to me to be one of the most fascinating developments certainly in U.S. politics, but probably in the politics of the OECD countries generally. It just seems to me there's something really intriguing going on there. In U.S. terms, as we know, there's a new so-called party system every 30 years or so, and maybe that's all we're seeing is the emergence of the latest party system. But it feels like there are bigger questions being asked, perhaps, and I'm just fascinated by what's happening. As somebody who's paid attention to this stuff for a while, and I was just really engaged by the two of you talking about this, and I thought, I really appreciate this, and I want to make sure they know that.
That's high praise. Thank you.
So And this is, I got into a long email argument with somebody today. Somebody I love dearly too.
Do
Who
I know
couldn't
this
believe-
person? Do I know this person?
Yes, you do. And I'm not
Okay,
going
I'm
to
sorry.
name and name.
Okay.
That person's mad right now. But so the reason being is because when this new alignment happened, and if you don't know, listeners, this happened when Bobby Kennedy dropped out of the presidential race and threw his weight behind Donald Trump, and which to me was one of the most shocking moments in political history that in my lifetime, and followed up by this interview he did with Tucker Carlson the next day, which I mean, Bobby Kennedy's a really intelligent man, and Tucker Carlson is
He really is. He really is.
but that last 12 minutes was basically a disquisition on sophiology, and which made me rethink a whole bunch of things about the political landscape and what might be possible. But what was your response to that minor or major earthquake, Gary?
Yeah, so I'm still processing it. And I think when this whole issue of realignment comes up, I often find that I'm almost tongue-tied because I've got too many different insights and ideas rushing around in my head and trying to find expression. Somebody, and I've been trying to remember who, and I just don't recall who at this point, but some observer of the US political scene commented in and around 2016 that at that time it seemed as if you really had four major factions. Obviously there are many others, but you had four major factions in US politics who could be seen as represented by Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Paul Ryan, and Bernie Sanders, and that the interesting development was going to be when the Ryan and Clinton factions faced off against the Sanders and Trump factions, and that that there were going to be, in effect, these commonalities that people discovered unexpectedly between alternative components of American populism. And populism is a controversial term. We can talk about whether it's the right term or not. But another way of thinking about this, I know you guys have talked appreciatively about people like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi. Glenn, I think, says very aptly, the divide that matters right now the most is between the establishment and dissenters. And I think there's something hugely important there that tracks much of the same divide, perhaps not perfectly, but something similar going on there. And so it seems to me as if the decision that RFK Jr. made to support the Trump campaign was a reflection, as far as I can see from what I've heard him say, of a real sense that this kind of dichotomy between establishmentarians and dissenters was very real in his own experience, that the establishment had decided that he was somebody to be sidelined, to not be taken seriously, and in particular, somebody who was not to be allowed to challenge Joe Biden for the presidential nomination of what at the time was their shared party. And, of course, there was, as we know, this very deliberate effort to simply squeeze out all alternatives from the Democratic primary process. And, when people talk about Biden's receipt of 14 million votes in that primary process, I always want to say, yeah, he got those votes when he was effectively, like Stalin, the only person on the ballot. And so, I think Bobby Kennedy's response is a very understandable one, to the sense that he was simply being told by the party establishment, you're not welcome, you're not going to get a place at the table. We're going to make sure you don't get to debate on the national stage. You're not going to get to participate in the party's own process. Nobody else is going to get to participate in that process either. And so I think, I understand completely when he says, look, even though there are some, things regarding which the Trump campaign and I disagree substantially, we share these concerns about peace and about freedom of speech and so forth. But I also think there's got to be this sense of profound frustration on his part at the marginalization to which he's been subjected, and what that reveals about the political dynamics of
Interesting.
American society.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my first pass at that.
Yeah, and what's been I've been watching it for a long time, and as an English professor, with my doctorates in religious writing of the Reformation and Renaissance. It's the oldest. I was telling people, even probably during Obama or when he was running, I said, this is just like it's Henry VIII. This is Henry VIII ran the first propaganda program. How do you turn England from a Catholic to a Protestant country in one generation? Bribery and propaganda. That's how. And and you saw the same. Well, I've been acutely aware of the power of the word and sloganry ever since I started looking at that, and you can trace it across time. And I remember I was asked to teach a block at a Waldorf school in Orange County, and high school kids. And so I went there, and I went there to teach them, and it was when Obama was running. I said, so you guys you can believe in hope and change? Is change always good? They're like, yeah, hope and change, baby. So, well, tomorrow I'll come to school and I'll chain you all to your desks. It'll be change. Not good, is it? But how these slogans just work on us. And actually, I wrote earlier this year.
The attempted to download joy is so damn
the party
funny.
of joy. That's right.
Yeah, that is.
I wrote earlier this year in my Substack about how propaganda is just, and this is just an outgrowth of magic from the Renaissance, because it's all about using language and image to control the wills of the weak.
So what large cycle are you going to put that in, or you just kind of keep it from, Henry VIII's time? Like, I admit to thinking of cycles within cycles. I throw a little Spengler in there. I throw the Age of Aquarius in there. When you were talking about the real divisions now, Gary, I looked up a quote from my friend Bill Kaufman, and it says, as so often is the case as this bloody century winds down, the divisions are not between liberals and conservatives or socialists and free marketeers, but between the local and the remote, the village and the globe, the flesh and blood and the abstract. That's another solid one too, right?
Yes.
That's another solid one. So for me, anybody who listens, I think, in the Catholic Church, true, it's I've got a little more anarchism in me lately, but it's the Christian, it's the bottom up as opposed to the top down. John Cowper Powys, who I mentioned so much, he was here and he saw something new, a new advent in history in the Iowan farmer, for whom the class system had been actually eradicated. He couldn't find it. How he could smell it out if it was there, even implicitly. And he goes, oh my gosh, what's happening in America? What's happening in America? And all these themes energize me, liberty, Walt Whitman, things like that.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned Bill. You've mentioned him before.
Yeah, he's a good friend, lives very close by.
Yeah, I would certainly not want to pretend that Bill and I were close buddies, but we are acquainted. And
cool.
he was gracious enough to blurb a book I edited a few years ago.
Oh, wow. I'll have to talk to him about it.
And I actually just had an email exchange with him in the last couple of weeks about a project that I was contemplating related to this set of issues that we're talking about here.
He's an important American, isn't he?
Yeah.
And again, he's principled, so he doesn't really do podcasts. He did one for Front Porch Republic, and I think that more credit to him. So he's not caught up in being like a purist or something. But he knows he's
No.
welcome on anytime. But if he ever hears this, I admire that guy so much. You know.
Well, yeah, I think he is certainly admirable. And there are multiple things to admire about him. One thing I admire is that I think he is such a fine prose stylist.
Oh, absolutely.
I think really, really well of that. But you know, I was thinking about the observation about the rhetorical framing of Obama and the Obama campaign, and I wanted to just dive into that a little bit because it
Sure.
just made me think about that period. I know that you guys care about issues of war and empire, and it's one of the things I really like about
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And it's something that
Disagree with nobody.
it's something that I genuinely feel snookered by where Obama is concerned. I mean, because I remember in that 2008 campaign, I think he went out of his way to position himself in some important ways as the peace candidate, and he clearly drew a sharp distinction between himself and Hillary Clinton regarding that. And she indeed kind of, I think, played into his hands by criticizing him as you know, a softy. How dare he forswear certain uses of nuclear weapons and so forth. And I remember being really impressed by that and really cheering at the time. And then it quickly became apparent that none of that mattered. And you know, I've observed many times that, you know, so many people were frustrated by the time the 8 years of George Bush's presidency had come to an end. And if you had gone to central casting and said, please find me the anti-Bush, it would have been hard to find somebody more perfect than Barack Obama, somebody who seemed urbane in contrast to Bush's kind of hickishness, somebody who seemed cosmopolitan, somebody who seemed to be pacific rather than bellicose. And it turned out he was happy to serve Bush's third and fourth terms. And
Wow,
Exactly.
wow.
you
Yeah.
know,
I mean, yeah, well said.
it just really struck me that you know, we were led to think he was going to you know, mark a really pronounced change in the imperial policy that that Bush had embraced. And you know, it's not to say there weren't ever moments when he might have done things differently. I think he really did not, for instance, at all like Bibi Netanyahu, and sometimes, you know, wasn't going to go along with Bibi. But on the whole, the similarities were more pronounced than the differences. And I was so struck by how naive I had been, I think.
Well,
You
he
know.
that was,
Go
I
ahead.
think
Yeah.
that was a genius moment in propaganda and in manipulation, and the Democratic Party. I mean, yes, I'm going to rip on him. Has been perfecting that ever since. It's you have to stand in awe at their
But aren't we talking
their
about the uniparty
mastery
at the
of
same time?
propaganda.
Yeah.
Pardon
But aren't
me?
we talking about the uniparty at the same time? Is it?
Well, yes and no, I think.
I'm with you. But a quick question, because Gary on both of these, that
Yeah,
question, but
please.
also because I think our listeners are interested. So, you know, somebody told the story of Donald Trump, and I think Bill Kaufman could say the same thing, you know, that he was surrounded right away by this group, you know, that he gets into the office, has some leanings towards, you know, almost no wars. And he fought it a little bit. Two things. One, I think some people are arguing he's more compromised by it now, just going to Berkshire Hathaway to fund his campaign. I don't know enough. But the second one would be that Obama gets into the Oval Office and he becomes George Bush. So well said, third and fourth terms. Deep state, permanent Washington. What do you call this thing that grabs them and kind of uses them as puppets? Or flesh that out a little bit for me.
Yeah, and that's the actual mechanisms, the actual mechanics there are not transparent. And so anything I
Yeah,
say
right.
probably
Yeah.
ought to be taken with a grain of salt. But look, there are people who seem to think that the expression deep state was concocted by Donald Trump and is some kind of something that's somehow coded as Trumpian. My understanding is the first usage of that term actually was an analysis of Turkish politics
Yeah, okay.
toward the end of the 20th or beginning of the 21st century, and I think it's a very apt term to describe.
And with Turkey, the nation state is a theme in this, but that might come later. The nation state has these things. Yeah.
Right. And so the idea that that there are deep politics, the idea that there are political actors, some of them filling formal roles and some of them just well connected, who remain important from administration to administration, actors, especially one would think in intelligence, in foreign policy, in finance, maybe a few other areas, but those seem like the main areas, that those people are important on an ongoing basis, and that some of them who don't necessarily seek much public acclaim are having quiet conversations as they judge them to be needed and getting done what they want to get done from year to year. That doesn't seem at all unreasonable to me, and so the idea that whether you're Obama or whether you're Trump or whether you're anybody else, whether you're Joe Biden, you're going to be affected by the presence in Washington and the presence in your social circles and so forth of these people who are ongoing, if you will, repeat players. I'm sure that's right. So the interesting question, I guess, is that a kind of, so first of all, is that an impenetrable wall? Could you ever get people in office who are really prepared to shake things up in a serious way? And then I guess the other thing you'd want to ask about, you were talking about the uniparty, right? So I think it seems to me there's a uniparty. On the other hand, the uniparty has factions. And
right.
It's not the case, it seems to me, that there's just one kind of unified standpoint that is occupied by all of these I don't want to say elites, these kind of hidden players. I think during one of you, I don't want to kind of suggest this is the only lens to use at all. I'm just mentioning it because I thought about it when you were having a recent conversation. I don't know whether you've ever read Carl Oglesby's The Yankee and Cowboy War.
No.
But Oglesby,
but like the Texas Oilman versus that, like that dynamic, the Boston Brahmin type thing. Yeah, that's
exactly.
a thing. Sure.
So Oglesby kind of uses that as a lens for post-war politics. And
it's relevant.
And so I want to say, my friend Roderick Long likes to observe that what would be the best way to get it? Well, I don't need to drag Roderick into this. The bottom line is you can have factions that are, if you will, united against us, even as they're divided against each other.
Like rival gangs in a mafia.
Right. That when the overall structure that they are kind of invested in is threatened, then they, I think, can combine forces. But it doesn't mean that they don't have different interests in play at different points.
And I think that's how I would describe it. But like the advent of the power of the intelligence agencies, bring that. But Michael, you go. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I think what you see, neocon used to be a term we used only for Republicans, certain stripe of Republicans. Now they're on both sides, right?
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
and I think and this is, I think, pertains to this particular political moment, is that those neocons, they like their war, and they don't want the machine, they don't want the gravy train to stop. And but on the other hand, you have this peace movement that has just kind of spontaneously sprouted with with Trump and Bobby Kennedy and all the people who are being attracted to that coalition, as they were been calling it, across different lines, different demographic lines and political lines. I mean, you have people like Brett Weinstein being attracted to, moving in that direction, and other people as well. And Naomi Wolf is another one. I mean, you don't get more democratic than being Al Gore's campaign manager, right? But and I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but to me, the dividing line seems to have been what happened with COVID.
So I think that mattered a lot because it really exposed the degree to which many people with political power operated and wanted to operate unchecked. They wanted to shut down debate. They wanted to brand as borderline criminals those who disagreed. They certainly wanted to mock and marginalize anybody who disagreed with them. So I think that's absolutely right. I feel like this is a development that has been playing out over an extended period.
9/11.
Yeah, I think the aftermath of 9/11 absolutely is crucial.
It's what they call emergencyocracy, right? It's been going for a long time, maybe since 53, where every emergency is used to take away some freedoms that are never given back.
Oh, clearly.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're acquainted with Bob Higgs's book Crisis and Leviathan, but Bob, who's an economic historian, talks about the way in which there's as he calls it, a ratchet effect. That every time there's a crisis, the power of Leviathan increases, and so he kind of tells the story of this process over decades of American history, with a focus on the degree to which it's just seems irreversible repeatedly. I mean, the one time it appeared that maybe there was going to be a real upset was in the aftermath of Watergate. And you really had you had the church committee meeting, then you had Congress trying to take back some of its power from the president with the War Powers Act and so forth, and yet it seemed ultimately that didn't last very long. And
Carter was something of an upsurge again, right? Walter Karp, this great liberty-loving journalist. I'm reading a book by his, and it was just how Carter was trying to do things regarding the intelligence agency, sacking most of them. There's great stories to be told there. But I think that timeline with, Carter gave it a go in one sense.
Yes, he did. But sadly,
they took him down for it.
Carter was a smart guy and a decent guy, but he clearly didn't know his way around Washington well enough to get stuff done. I mean, it's I want to just back up for a second on the neocons, because I think that movement has been so intriguing, right? So I think, of course, you're right that for a long time you had neocons who were Republicans. The important thing to remember is they started out as Trotskyists. Right. I mean, these are guys who mainly guys, not all, who begin as Shachtmanites, they're anti-Stalinist, but kind of broadly in the Marxist tradition. And then you see people going through transitions in the 60s, but then they start out when they enter the mainstream, they're Democrats. They're especially working for Scoop Jackson in Washington. And then when the Republicans come back into control of the White House in 1980, I think Reagan's a more complicated figure than the neocons might like. I certainly don't think Reagan's any straightforward sense of neocon. I'm sure, for instance, they didn't like the attempt to really eliminate nuclear weapons with Gorbachev. But the bottom line is they found toeholds in the administration there, and moved into the Republican space. But then what's been clear is that because of Trump's disaffection for many of their international projects, now they've all moved back enthusiastically onto the Democratic side.
Lynn Cheney is going to vote for Kamala Harris, she
Yeah.
reveals. It's just so crazy and so boring. And then media loves it that this famous Republican is actually going to vote for Kamala.
Speaking of
More,
neocon.
neocon.
Is anyone surprised? Is I guess my
No.
question. Yeah.
Did you see Christian Bale star as her dad in that movie?
Did he
some
really?
movie-
Was it
I
Christian
you know,
Bale?
I have
Was?
not seen that
didn't see the
movie. I know he
but
did. He
that's right.
It's super intense.
It looked
It's
like an
super-
amazing performance, but I
Yeah,
haven't.
yeah,
Haven't seen
yeah.
it.
It was amazing.
So
Dark.
I mean, now tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm at least I feel like I'm sensing that what they're calling the unity party is something that could disrupt that power hold between the Republicans and the Democrats, which
So they're
nothing-
calling the Trump Kennedy thing the Unity Party now?
Oh, they're calling it that.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be really fascinating to see if that happens, if it really has that disruptive effect. Clearly, you've got people like Kennedy, like Tulsi Gabbard, who clearly see it playing that kind of role, and it'll be intriguing to me if that disruptive momentum persists. Right, I think it's not clear to me yet whether that's in fact going to be the case, or whether, as you were saying earlier, whether because of sources of money, or because of where the perceived votes are, or whatever, we end up getting a less disruptive performance than we might have
Well, it was
anticipated.
Let me
interesting.
put forth a theory. Yeah, go, Mike. I'll put it
In the
forth in a
last
little
week,
bit.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if you caught it, but there was about a 15-minute video that Tulsi Gabbard dropped about that, I think was yesterday, the day before, about how the Biden-Harris administration, as soon as she challenged Harris on television recently, they put her on a watch list, so she and her husband can't fly without going through,
Wow.
TSA, going through everything and checking them for gunpowder and explosives and the whole bit.
Oh,
And
they've got dogs. There are like 5 people who end up being assigned to tail them. I mean, it's really quite remarkable
Oh,
that
it's so dark.
I mean,
It is
and of
dark.
course, they will have known that they were getting harassed, but it's not until a couple of whistleblowers, I guess,
Yep.
from the Air Marshal Service came forward that there's actual confirmation that, this is really what's happening on the inside. It's really awful.
So is that a budding totalitarianism?
Sure.
It really feels like an immensely dangerous abuse of political power. I find it
Right.
deeply troubling.
Yeah, I mean, you can also, I mean, we won't talk about whether the Trump assassination attempt was an
Yeah.
inside job, but you can see with how many times did the administration reject Bobby Kennedy's request for Secret Service protection?
Yes.
It's another, they keep, this is what, and of course we could talk about their multiple requests and pressure they put on social media companies to censor free speech.
Totally.
But the other thing that happened this week.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just that upsets me so much that I feel like I just have to dive in and underscore the seriousness of that phenomenon, right?
The Alex Berenson storyline,
Mhm.
it's really important stuff.
But the other thing the other thing that happened there were, Nicole Shanahan.
Yes.
She, I think I'm in love. No, she's like the ace in the hole they have over there. She keeps dropping these ads, and then
I gotta watch them.
podcasts.
Yeah. Oh, that
She's
commercial she
worth
did was
watching.
so amusing. I really,
She's charming and she's smart as a whip. And she did one yesterday, I think it was with Thomas Massey, the congressman from
Yeah.
I've seen part of that. I haven't seen the whole thing yet.
It's really good, but here again, somebody from the Democratic left and the libertarian right coming together and talking about working together.
Yeah.
Which is another kind of unity gesture, which, to me, when I see that stuff, it gives me hope.
Well, let me give a theory on how it could succeed or not. So, like, Michael, I think you're more probably hopeful, optimistic than I am, but I'm pretty close.
I didn't say I'm hopeful, but
Okay.
I said it gives me hope.
Sure, I'm
I
definitely
still think
hopeful,
you're
but
up
I'm not
against-
optimistic. Yeah. And
They're-
Gary,
they're-
you qualified it. I would say this. One is and it kind of ties into like our conversation or even the previous two podcasts. I would see that this Trump thing, even with Kennedy and so forth, left to itself, will be an epiphenomenon on kind of the descent into Caesarism. I say all the time, I don't think he's a Hitler figure, but he would fit being a Caesar figure. And we're all using different historical analogies. So what could stop that? I'm a Christian. I don't think history is predetermined, that we have to go through cycles. So what could stop it? It would be, in a sense, Michael, you have this strength too, but like the Regeneration podcast is about soil. It's about schools completely. It's about, if we keep talking politics, not us, but yeah, as a microcosm, we got some Pavlov's dog treatment on talking about politics, right? And but I think provided we're all into the kind of this game so much and not out, I'm going back to the Bill Kaufman quote. It's about the local, not the abstract. Brighten the corner where you live is the best thing you can do to help this thing lead to a really new political realignment. That's my theory. Both of you give feedback on that. I think it washes up into just another political phenomenon of Caesarism.
Well, I think
without people taking charge of themselves, being incarnational, stepping into their Christ, their Christian robes, and taking on their equality, the equality of all human souls, and treating people like they did in Iowa. Let's get rid of the class system. Let's be generally strongly against war, and get involved in those things at the local level. Otherwise, I think this is all an epiphenomenon. It's all taking place online.
Well, you just described my Amish neighbors, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Well, the thing is, and I was thinking a lot about this today. I'm pretty much 80% Christian anarchist.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's kind of a luxury to be I'm a Christian anarchist. We make fun of the distributists who just read Tolkien and smoke pipes and drink beer, right? But Christian anarchism.
I didn't know we were part of a group.
And I think Christian anarchism, I think, would work in a country even as big as this, with Jefferson's idea of the yeoman farmer as a country of yeoman farmers, which is what the Amish are. And the thing is, talk about local, right? But even that won't work, or distributism couldn't work even on a small scale if you live in a country that won't leave the little people alone.
No, and you heard Guido Pepperata on this. Remember that one time he was eloquent, just saying he surveyed everything. And Gary, you might need to bring in some of your stuff on the history of the nation state. I don't think we can do it in a country this size. I certainly don't. But the Guido Pepperata would say where we are now globally, it's just, again, another theory is people would say, oh, they're censoring this play I wanted to put on, at the theater downtown, and he's build your own theater. Oh, they're doing this to me. Build your own hospital. Start your own medical thing, right?
But they won't let you get a building permit.
No, it's tricky, right?
Or hospital accreditation.
Yeah. I could do it completely. Again, we find our own or parallel polis. We might have to get serious about that, a perishable currency. Gary, what do you think about this stuff?
I mean, look, the people some of the people I've learned the most from would absolutely want to talk in those terms. And the language that I often find them using is building the new society within the shell of the old.
I use it a lot, and I'm open to critiques.
And, so I think, I guess what I would say is I think it's absolutely the case that the most stable and sustainable kind of transition to a better social order is one that is rooted in better institutions, which, people obviously are going to be best able to create at human scale. I don't think I'm prepared to say that's the only path I'd want to encourage anyone to take, not least because I think, look, we play to our strengths, and my strengths, if they are strengths, involve probably not building institutions from scratch, but talking about these kinds of issues in ways that I hope affect people's imaginations and their insights in a variety of locations. But I completely agree that, what you're talking about matters, and the key thing is going to be to develop those local institutions in ways that are not, either co-opted or erased by the power of Leviathan.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and that's actually, I mentioned it before. So the Amish that I know, in fact, so this morning I actually had to make an appointment to take in my lambs to be butchered. And so it's 3 months ahead of time, and they still, it's almost 4 months till I can get them in. They're so busy. But for the longest time, in the last couple of years, the state of Michigan has been coming down hard on these Amish producers and butchers and other kinds of people, as we saw in Pennsylvania recently with Amos Miller, I think his name is.
Yeah. It's a
Where
very
you
important
see
story.
hostile, and I think it's always Democratic administrations coming down hard on these independent producers who, and the thing is, what happens with the Amish, it's not only that they're doing these things kind of outside the system, but they're flourishing.
Yeah. And there is nothing like success to demonstrate the degree to which the status quo isn't necessary, right? When you can put an alternative on display, and I think that's one of the things that I've learned the most from.
This is a good point.
The kind of Anabaptist and Anabaptist influenced Christian theologians who've talked about this. I think about the work of
Stanley Hauerwas, maybe.
So Hauerwas, yeah, but I'm thinking farther back, and I'm thinking of actual kind of demonstration projects. Why am I blanking? Clarence Jordan.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one thing to talk about racial reconciliation. It's another thing to just show people that a bunch of folks from different ethnocultural backgrounds can live and work together fruitfully next door to a more conventional kind of space in the Red Hills of Georgia. And that can be deeply unsettling if your whole ideology is rooted in the notion that we can't possibly have a genuine kind of integrated community. And so somebody says, well, yeah, you can. I showed you. There's nothing like putting it on display.
I've been to that place in Georgia. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking back to what you were saying about the degree to which Democratic state administrations were the ones involved in suppressing some of these local efforts at kind of operating outside the reach of Leviathan. One thing that I think he kind of tracks or prefigures this conflict, right, between, as I've said, establishment and dissent is, it seems to me, beginning of the 20th century into the 19th in both the US and Britain. I don't know other places well enough to comment, but certainly in both of those societies, you get the emergence of what later gets referred to by Milovan as the new class, this managerial professional class that is there as a result of university education becoming a more widespread option for people who are products of university education who are now there to staff all of the big institutions, right? The corporations, the foundations, the government bureaus, later the unions that have all kind of emerged in this period. And I think it's, so in the US, there are many, at least in many cases, operating under the progressive umbrella. In Britain, the Fabians. But what happens, it seems to me, is that Tony Blair's New Labor and certainly the Democratic Party of the Clintons, maybe earlier, but certainly those two really become the parties of the managerial professional class. And so when those people then naturally are committed to the view that what we need is bureaucratic regularization of a whole range of social phenomena. And so, of course, it's predictable that they're going to be especially invested in shutting down things like the activity of Amish farmers who don't fall within the bounds of their kind of expectations and regulations and so forth. I mean, I think it's there really is in that. So I'm committed to the view, and I've edited a book about this, right? That the best way to think about class conflict is not to think about that in terms of the means of production in the kind of Marxist way, but rather with reference to the people who actually influenced Marx, the so-called French liberals from the early part of the 19th century, who basically said it's access to state power that defines, the ruling class finally. And I think that managerial professional class isn't by any means the only group with access to state power, but it is crucially connected with state power because it staffs so many of the agencies of the state and of the entities, the kind of parastate entities that are allied with the state. So anyway,
interestingly, you probably know this book, Edward Bernays, I think 1928 book, Propaganda.
Which he uses a good word.
Yeah. Oh, we have to read it. And there, I mean, this is the project, right? And this is where it connects to Henry VIII, which propaganda is not aimed at the lower classes. It's aimed at the middle managers. And that's how you what Bernays calls you function with you create the engineering of consent. Right. And that's what Henry VIII did. He either bribed or propagandized those middle managers, right? You do what I want. I'll take away this land from the monastery and give it to you.
Give it to you, right? The dissolution project was
the dissolution, which is what it was. And the same thing you can see right now with those middle managers we're talking about. And you're in higher education. I was for the longest time. That's where the propaganda works best. That's where you see. In fact, if I go to Ann Arbor, so I live in Jackson County, Michigan, out in the middle of the place. If I go to Ann Arbor, I see. I can't even tell you how many masks I see on people at Whole Foods. There's only one Whole Foods within 50 miles. That's the only one. So we go there, everybody's got a mask on. You never see one in Jackson County. Never. But that's also, Ann Arbor is the per capita, it's the highest, how would they have the most PhDs per capita of the entire state. It's a highly educated city.
Sure.
But it's also the place that I think even still to this day, some of the bookstores, and I won't go in Ann Arbor anymore, they still have the signs on the door that say, "You are not, please don't come in unless you are fully vaccinated."
Wow. Wow. Okay. Even though apparently they're not paying attention to the science and understanding that a full range of COVID vaccination doesn't prevent you from being infectious to others. But
right. Yeah. Whatever. And again, you're being very generous with the whole thing, but that alone. Yeah. We got to both read. I'm sure you've read Revolt of the Elites, Gary, Christopher Lash's book.
No, I mean, I'm obviously aware of Lash and have been aware of his work for a long time, but no, I haven't.
Okay. It's just like when we were talking about like that kind of elite class, the permanent, that when COVID happened, and I'd read it, but all of a sudden that became, I don't know if you recall on Twitter, people saying, holy crap, like he just described it perfectly. And the book is on my shelf because I had to order it again. I'd lent it out. And I need to go back to it. But our friend, I'm sure there's some front porch people who could come on and talk Lash on Revolt of the Elites.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because we need to get into this phenomenon, really well. So interesting, Gary. So interesting.
So here's the question I next have. I mean, related to your book, Christianity and the Nation State. So where are we with Christianity and the nation state right now, especially in the United States right now? But across the world, I mean, across the West, it just looks like a nightmare to me. You see what's going on in England and Ireland in particular. It's just everything seems.
Well, it's either that or state religion, kind of like Hungary,
Well,
caught crucified between two thieves.
Right. And as I mentioned, this Saturday we'll be having a conversation with my people on Christianity or Europe or Christendom in Europe. But so where are we now, Gary?
But by the way, if just a parenthesis there. Christendom or Europe, I think is just such a fascinating dichotomy. Have you run across the very recent work of the political scientist Tobias Kramer?
I have not.
So Cremer, Tobias Kramer, who's he's a German political scientist who I guess teaches in the religion faculty at Oxford, and did a PhD at Cambridge. And he's very interested in the way in which in the US and in Europe, there's been a kind of resurgence of interest in and kind of nominal affirmation of Christianity on the part of certain groups on the political right. But then what he's noticed is the degree to which, for many of these groups, what matters is Christianity as a cultural marker rather than Christianity as, in fact, something to be affirmed. It's not about worship and prayer and spirituality, but it's upholding a cultural marker in the face of the Muslim hordes or something like that. And
that's kind of Deneen's project and things, right? Like everybody's working from a certain metaphysics, so you better make it yours,
Yeah. So I find what Kramer's been up to there interesting, but yeah, this broader question of where we are, I'm look, I'm a philosophical theologian. I'm not a sociologist or a historian, so what I say is probably going to be fairly amateurish, but as a theologian, I'm really worried about idolatry. And I think idolatry is a constant temptation for people who bring their religious convictions into the political arena. And that doesn't mean that there isn't something to be said about, from the standpoint of Christian faith about politics, but it means I think you've got to be profoundly careful. And where I notice it over and over again is with the tendency to respond, and I've just noticed this, especially in recent, maybe the last half decade to decade of American politics, in particular, to respond to disagreement by treating it as a sign of spiritual
for sure
bankruptcy, and so it's just funny to me that people who are nominally committed to grace and to divine welcome and so forth end up all too frequently viewing people they don't understand and with whom they disagree as agents of Satan. And
right.
I'm deeply troubled by that, because I think it's fundamentally idolatrous. It's turning your project into God's project. And
both sides do it, don't they? Like the Republican will say we're following Christianity, and all the Democrats are doing it is calling that white nationalism, as they take what's being offered by the nation state and then they call that Christianity. They just figure, they're doing the same thing. It's a mirror image of each other.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I don't mean for a moment to suggest that I think it's only one side or the other. I think it's really a problem that somehow there's a temptation that comes to expression in different ways, but it's the same fundamental temptation.
I mean, it's you probably know Jean-Luc Marien's work, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Where idle in distance, where when and in God without being, the idea, and I was actually talking about this with my class the other day, that anything can be turned into an idol. The Eucharist can be turned into an idol. Jesus can be turned into an idol, because as Marian describes it, which I think is so beautiful, that it can be either a mirror or it can be a window, right? Yeah. It can if it's a mirror, if the idol reflects back to your own interests and desires, that's an idol.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it leads you into
I've heard that before, but that's necessary.
It's an icon, right?
And I mean, look, the reality fundamentally is it's a temptation you never escape, because there is no all the categories we use, all the language we use, all the images we use are ours. It's not as if we get some theological formulation off of God's laser writer. And even if there were, we would unavoidably be appropriating that in light of our own finitude, fallibility, and sin. And so, therefore, we're always tempted to recast whatever it is, no matter how holy or transcendent, in our own image.
I think something that troubles this kind of understanding for some people is, I still hold some fondness for like Rudolf Steiner's distinction between Ahrimanic evil and Luciferic evil. Are you familiar with that at all, Gary?
I mean, I'm broadly aware of Steiner, but talk to me about what he's doing.
Okay, but what he does for me, then Michael can unpack it from like pure Steiner. But what you see is like Trump could be Luciferic. You kind of leave the earth. It's that fire and everything. And the Ahrimanic evil is Madeleine Albright talking about collateral damage. It's bureaucratic. It's drone bombing. Right. Obama's chilling as Hellfire missiles are killing Yemeni people like it's going out of style at weddings. So that's in today's parlance, you can get a little bit. We didn't notice Hillary's evil. It's bureaucratic. It's census. It's numerical. It's left-brained. And so I think these two forms. All I know is in my ecumenical work for the diocese, I have to keep on like taking a pass on everybody wanting to show movies about Christian nationalism, right? Because I just think it just captures one side of the equation, this kind of left liberal leaning ideas. You watch the ABC News, you take whatever the zeitgeist is, and it's Ahrimanic and it's slow, but they just call that Christianity.
Well, let me give you another perspective on that. Like, so the way I understand it is, and I have some disagreements with Steiner about, or at least with anthroposophists about how this works out. But the way I like to understand it is the Luciferic gesture is promising you freedom. I'm going to give you freedom. You're going to be able to be yourself, right? You're going to be able to express yourself and do what you need to do, right? It's all about you, right? Yeah. Where Ahriman is more the technocracy type of approach. But here, I think a great example of this, the Luciferic working with the Ahrimanic, is that, and you see this with the trans phenomenon, right? These kids in school are promised they'll be your real self. You're going to be your real self. We're going to help you. We're going to give you, right? We're going to help you find yourself and realize yourself. And then what happens is the kid gets signed up for a pharmaceutical subscription service that will last for the rest of his life. Right, so that's Lucifer.
Wow,
handing it over into the hands of the technocracy.
So I wonder just a couple of
really
things.
Great, Michael.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I just say Michael's at his best with that stuff. Yeah.
Just a couple of things that occurred to me there. So one is, I wonder, when you're talking about Albright or Clinton there or Obama. So the kind of connection that my tired brain immediately made was with Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil.
Yeah. Sure. Yep. It's right there.
Yeah. It seemed like that was
the bureaucratization of evil. Right. Yeah. Filling out forms in triplicate as you're treating your family, really nice. But the forms filled out in triplicate are people getting on trains to be good.
Exactly. And then the kind of dichotomy between different modes or moments. It struck me there's some Reinhold Niebuhr in there somewhere. I think as well. The idea certainly that people are willing to do unimaginably horrific things on behalf of causes with which they identify that they would never do for themselves. They would think, oh, I mean, that would be horribly unjust for me to do this on and fulfilling my own agenda, and failing to recognize the degree to which it really still is their agenda. They've identified with this political institution or social institution that they're then willing to act for in war or in some other kind of aggressively awful way. But they've kind of displaced responsibility for whatever is being talked about on the institution. They identify with the institution, and then they're prepared to go ahead and just
and that's the great idolatry in a way, right?
Yeah.
And now, so part of what I'm looking at this unity party movement, which seems what I guess why I like it, it appeals to my anarchist sense of let's burn it down, right? Which destabilizes the administrative state, or destabilizes.
Yeah.
And I like that. I think that's, and we actually that applies to religion as well. I mean, I think one of the things that has come out in this Christian Romanticism course is that you have the tradition or you have the institution, which whether it's the Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox, it kind of just marches along, but then you have these wild card people like Novalis or Jakob Burma or who bring in these new insights, or William Blake, our patron saint, right? Who bring in these radical insights, but are still related to the Christian tradition, but which almost work as a kind of revitalization to that very tradition. Even though they're outside the limits, but they still attract people, and it gives people, or gives Christianity in a way a new lifeblood, because it's the institution itself can become the idol and can ossify. I mean, we know how, right? We've always done it like this, and very often, of course, I always tell people, I said, if I would have written about sociology 300 years ago, I would have been burned at the stake. Yeah. But I can talk about it all I want now, right? But people were ostracized and burned at the stake.
For my money, the greatest political theologian now, Gary, is this guy Christian Yanaros. He might be 95, an Eastern Orthodox, but just a layman, genteel. But he would call it the religionization of the ecclesial event. That Christ instantiated the ecclesial event, and then what you find is kind of the religionization of it, right? And in one sense, that kind of takes the life out of it. It just becomes about these set things, And Chesterton has the corrective, and Yanaros will go to Orthodox churches, and he likes gilt icons, But it's when we've turned this thing into a left brain machine,
Well, it's an institution, and you remember that great quote from Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah.
No, what's her name? Not who is
Marilyn Monroe.
Not Marilyn Monroe. What was her name? From way back with W.C. Fields, the bombshell. Mae West.
Mae West. Okay.
So Mae West, she said, will you ever get married? Marriage is an institution, and I'm not ready to be in an institution. With religion.
That's really funny. How about the George Bernanos line? Because it came to mind again this week. He predicted the amount of evil that would be done for the fear of looking sufficiently progressive, right? The notion. It's a good one, isn't it, Gary? Yeah. This absolutely. Notion of that came in and it made people so fearful, this notion of being on the side of love, being on the right side of history, this whole notion of just having the correct set of opinions. But what do you make of all that? I would call it ideology, but
yeah, I do think it's ideology. I mean, I obviously there are going to be some social settings in which the damage will be done by people who want to look conservative enough. So I mean, I do think it.
Sure, 100%. There's always the equal setting. And opposite reaction.
The desire for acceptance, the desire to fit in and be accepted and feel like you're part of the in group. I think can lead people, sadly, to do all kinds of.
It's powerful.
Okay, let me jump back. Okay, yeah.
And I think our institutions do that. I mean, I think whether it's higher education or the seminary system, that's how you move along, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You go along to get along. It's a grooming.
Sure.
And I want to because go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, just in the nature of the case, what is If you don't, you're gonna get washed out, right? It's you know, it happens in academia, it happens in the military. You mentioned it quite rightly, and with reference to the priesthood. The bottom line is, you know, it's a system that is, each of these is a system that is set up to ensure that people who are too far outside the mainstream simply don't continue to progress. And so they're excluded early on. I mean, there's definitely a self-selection process to some extent, because people think, I don't want to confront that. I can see what's likely to happen. I'm going to bow out. But if they don't, there's absolutely the possibility in any of those settings that they will be sidelined.
Absolutely.
And so theologically, I just want to add one little kind of thing,
Yeah.
because of your work in political theology, is that for an article for Michael's journal, Jesus the Imagination, and something I've worked on at Front Porch Republic and other places, but I was, to my great joy, I found it is very central to the philosophy of this Christian Eros, is that he said World Council of Churches hasn't done a thing. He just said, we only have one reason to meet as all these Christian denominations. You know, it's to talk about salvation. Nobody knows the hell what it means or anything. But again, when you have the ecclesial event, I've always used the Zacchaeus story to say that, you know, Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus because of the crowd. But what, you know, instead of salvation as being, you know, you do this thing so you get to place A called heaven and a voice place B called hell. Where Christ is working now, 2,000 years after the incarnation, the seminal one is saving people from crowds into community. The ecclesial event, right? A crowd, what is it? It's like concrete. Elias Canetti and others, they always compare it to a solid substance. It, you know, it agglomerates. It doesn't associate, it agglomerates. And so the distinction between a crowd and a community is where Christian theology needs to be right now, right? Because all this other worldly stuff is just not going to help. But the big thing that we're discussing is the power when we're talking about language and Orwell, the fear of looking sufficiently progressive, the fear of looking sufficiently intelligent, the fear of missing out. You know, all of these we got to name as crowd phenomenon. And that, you know, I always use that to look at church architecture too, the proscenium arch or the altar rail. You know, what's on the other side? It's a crowd, folks. It's a crowd. It was instituted after the Edict of Milan, you know, and so, but as the church is getting smaller, we need to think about a lot of these dynamics, because I think that's where salvation is located in our time, by name and a face and a story, rescuing individuals out of the crowd phenomenon.
I think that's super important, that the insight that individuality in community as opposed to getting lost in the crowd seems super important and well worth a lot more conversation.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, because we've gone a bit.
Sure.
I wonder if you could say something about the relationship of Christianity or the Christian individual to the nation state, because we're in a weird space right now where certainly in the West, a lot of the nation states have way too much power and are actually, and their power has turned on their own populations rather than outside enemies.
And in this answer, you could be seeding a whole other podcast with us too, Gary, right? It's obviously a big subject. Yeah.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm happy to have more conversations with you guys. I think this is great. I really enjoy the chance to connect with you here. I really think you've zeroed in on something hugely important in saying that power that is assumed with the stated goal of protecting the populace from threats, from external threats, then is turned around and is used as a basis for tyranny internally. And so, I think we don't have to look very far from that. Very far from where we're sitting now to see that, whether it's the way in which this develops in the U.S. in the wake of 9/11, the development of the internal security apparatus there and surveillance and so forth that's dramatically increased, whether it's more recently the public health authoritarianism that we saw emerge in 2020. here's a whole separate conversation to be had, but my friendly acquaintance, the political theorist Chandran Kukathas, makes the point that the same thing is true with regard to immigration, that the more restrictive you want to be with regard to immigration, the more restrictive you are of the domestic population, and it's so I think in a whole range of contexts,
Wow.
this becomes a really significant point. So where are we with regard to the nation state? I think we're in a position in which we see its fangs unbared, or fangs bared, not unbared. We see its fangs bared. We see something that, really kind of came into its own, around the time of Henry VIII, really, shown for what it is, for a monopolist that brooks no opposition and wants to suppress dissent. And so there may be, in particular contexts, some reason to, participate in, the institutions that are part of the state just for defensive purposes. But I don't think we should ever have any illusions that this is anything but a deeply flawed structure ultimately that needs to be replaced. Do I have a magic formula for replacing it? No, we talked about that earlier, and I clearly don't. But I mean, where do we stand in relation to this? I think we ought to be deeply suspicious of its idolatrous claims. That's the most important thing I want to underscore.
Wow, what a great, humble but powerful. Yeah, something we can all do.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. Gary, can you tell people how to kind of find your books or how to track?
Sure. The simplest thing probably is to visit my website, which is garychartier.net or .com. There's some difficulty right now with the resolution there, but if you go to garychartier.com, I think you'll find that you'll get through after a bit. Look me up on Amazon. You'll find a variety of books in theology and philosophy and nonsense there. Thank you so much.
What an interesting, courageous, clear thinker. Thank you, Gary Chartier. And thanks for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We're going to see you back here very soon.